Something to start me off in a good mood. I want to talk about one of the highest grossing tours that Jim Crockett Promotions ever mounted and how it started with me having surgery. I mean, everybody talks about the '86 Great American Bash because it was the first big tour, and everybody talks about '88 because it was the first pay-per-view and it was a bigger tour overall with a lot more places, and that's when TBS was heavily involved. So '87 doesn't get a lot of love, right? But it actually, when you go back, it did some good business. So I thought we would go back and look through July of 1987 and figure out exactly what happened. And I have not looked ahead of time through my book here. I haven't read that, guys, because I don't sit here normally during the course of a day and read my old books, so I haven't looked at any of this for a while. So we will see what I recall and what you can prompt, Brian, with your encyclopedic knowledge of everything that ever happened.
Big Red Reese.
He was not on the '87 Great American Bash Tour.
That's right.
All right, let's see here. Okay, it was June 27th, by the way, for those keeping track. We go to Philadelphia. We're at Civic Center, and that's a Saturday night. And it's a 2 out of 3 fall match with Rock and Roll Express for the tag team title that they possessed that then for the NWA World Tag Title. So we split to falls, and then in the third fall, I roll in and do a quick gut shot with the racket on Ricky for a disqualification, and they throw Robert over the top rope, and we start getting some heat on Ricky, and we drop his throat on the racket and steal the belts, and we're going to leave, right? When the troops come, they send Robert rolls in with a chair, and some other people run in. And the very last kick I throw on Ricky when I see the baby faces coming, right? I give a big one, boom, and kick him with my right foot, but my left leg was straight, and I felt, I never found it because I immediately had to roll out and get out of there, but I felt that the padding had kind of separated in the underneath the canvas, and when my foot hit, it kind of went in sideways. So, but I knew the feeling because I'd done it at Stargate. I've just torn my ACL. Boom, knee goes out. And so I get back to the locker room, and I'm like, oh, fuck, again. And what timing, because the Bash Tour starts in like 3 days. So I don't know what the house was that night in Philly because the tearing the ACL kind of took the business out of me. But we got paid $700. So there were probably in the neighborhood of 8,000 people there, I would think. But then the next day we fly back home to Charlotte. But this is how they scheduled things in those days, folks. We were in Greenville, North Carolina, which is all the way out toward the eastern part of the state, on Friday night. 280 miles we drove back to Charlotte that night. Then we took Crockett's plane. As a matter of fact, yes, some people took Crockett's plane, but I flew commercial. To Philadelphia the next day, Saturday, did a show. Sunday morning, I flew commercial back to Charlotte and was scheduled to be at a TV taping in Rock Hill, South Carolina at 1 o'clock. But since I had torn the fucking ligament, it was huge, and I was in the process of getting it drained, etc. I didn't make the TV taping. But then after they did 2 hours of TV in Rock Hill from 2 to 4, they took Crockett's plane and went to Wilmington, North Carolina, back, literally, we've been to Philadelphia, right? They went back literally within a fucking hour's drive of Greenville, North Carolina for Sunday, and did another $29,000 there with the main event of the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express. So that's how they used to schedule things. We did 4 shows in, what is that, 72 fucking hours, and a TV taping was amongst them. Anyway, I missed Greenville on Monday because that's when I had the knee scoped. They didn't repair the ligament. This is the one I finally had fixed in 2006 and have regretted that. But they had to go in and clean out the damage because I had cartilage was torn, it was floating around, and the ends of the ligament and everything. So they scope it, and the theory is hopefully I can get back in, they say 2 weeks, and I'm like, I got to get back quicker than that. So but Greenville, South Carolina was June 29th. And Columbia, South Carolina was June 30th. And they did about 15 grand in Greenville, 13 grand in Columbia. This was nothing because the Bash Tour was scheduled to start on the 1st, right? Lakeland, Florida, July 1st, the Civic Center, a $40,000 house. So back in those, let's say 30-something hundred people. The Midnight Wrestle to Rock and Roll Express, I was not there. But here's the thing. We had made it known to Jim Crockett when I had to have surgery that the last time, such as 6 months ago, I tore my other knee and I was off 2 weeks. You didn't pay me shit. And it'd be nice if I got something because I was injured in the line of duty, right? So I was getting payoffs on the good houses, but not on the shitty houses. So for the expense they went to put on the Great American Bash in Lakeland, Florida, and draw 40 grand, apparently they didn't make any money because I didn't get paid.
Wow.
But the following day, in Landover, Maryland, at the Capitol Center, with the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express next to, second from the top on the card for the World Tag Team title, and they did a $195,000 house, which was a record for the NWA in Landover. And I got $1,000 out of it. I think the boys probably got 2 or like twice what, because I was getting half pay since I wasn't there. But at least I got something, right? Because I'm still recovering. Richmond, Virginia, Friday, July 3rd. The Rock and Roll Express, 2 out of 3 falls for the World Tag title. And Bubba is at ringside, by the way, for these matches. So at least they had some backup there. But Richmond did 125 grand, and I got $500. So it's like, half again what I would have got. But this one is the one that hurt because they shot this for TV. And this is the one where you see Bubba roll in and give Ricky Morton the Bubba Slam and his hat falls off. And when he rolls out and one of the Midnight's tops Ricky, and Tommy Young rolls over to count and counts 1 and 2 and then comes up with the hat. That was this one in Atlanta. They did TV at the Omni. The house was $245,000. So like 16,000 people. I got $1,000, but I couldn't be there, right? So that one hurt. And then the next day in Charleston, West Virginia at the Civic Center, July 5th, $95,000 house against the Road Warriors for the U.S. Tag title, where we were defending. And I got $350, but I was not there. And then the 2 I enjoyed not being at, to be honest with you. Well, July 6th and July 7th, the Forum in Los Angeles on Monday, July 6th, and the San Francisco Civic Arena on July 7th. And actually, I would have liked to have been in San Francisco. The Forum did $85,000. I don't know if that's enough to pay the light bill in that fucking place. We should not have been running Los Angeles, especially take the guys from Charleston, West Virginia on Sunday night to Los Angeles on Monday night. $85,000 would have been great if it was Greenville, South Carolina, but not Los Angeles at the Forum. In San Francisco, that old Civic Arena, they did 66 grand, and that was a better atmosphere and certainly a cheaper building. But for fuck's sake, once again, to go all the way to the West Coast, and we had a match with the Road Warriors. So just the trip alone, and with that, my knee still swelled up from the surgery, and trying to sit on the planes or navigate the cabs or whatever, that would have been insane. So and then they did Atlanta TV on July the 8th, which I was at. So I returned on July 8th, Atlanta TV. So basically, I heard it on the 29th. No, on the 27th. I went home on the 28th. I had surgery on the 29th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10 days later, I come back to TV. You bastards. You can't stop it. Of course, when I wasn't on camera, I was using a crutch to get around anyway. I used it that weekend, but more on that later. But anyway, so Atlanta TV 10 days later, we do the 2 tapes. Then July 9th was Cincinnati. The Gardens this time, not the Riverfront Stadium like they had done the previous year. And it was the Rock and Roll Express for the World Tag title. And this house did 63 grand, which was not by any means record business territory in Cincinnati, but wasn't that bad. And I got $470 for actually being there on crutches, whereas I made $1,000 for not even being there at the Omni, but the house was 4 times as much. Anyway, so I got my feet back wet at the Gardens, and I had Bubba to help me around on at ringside because I'm basically, the knee is not bending that well yet, so I've got one crutch that I'm getting around on, I think, as I recall, just one, so I can have the racket in the other hand. Then we go Friday, July 10th to Pittsburgh, the Civic Arena, and Brian Hildebrand and his father Regis were there, and this was a semi-final U.S. title match, it says. I have no idea. I think we were the champions, but against Garvin and Wyndham. And Pittsburgh at the Civic Arena did $142,000, which is, I would say, topping 12,000, even at Bash ticket prices probably, topping 12,000 people. Our payoff was $1,035. I forgot to do the inflation calculator, but on exact amounts, but we'd established at the mid-80s, $100 then is about, what, $235 today, so almost 2.5 times. So say that Pittsburgh house would have been, by that logic, what, over $400,000, or close to $400,000, and our payoffs would have been $2,500 a piece. Saturday, July 11th, we go from Pittsburgh, and this fucking routing. This is what killed Jim Crockett Promotions, was the routing. Friday night is Pittsburgh. Saturday is Oklahoma City at the Myriad. We wrestled the Road Warriors, and they beat us wholeheartedly. And the house was $54,000 because the old Mid-South territory was not what it once was. But that was still a $500 shot. But then guess where we were on Sunday? We've been in Pittsburgh on Friday, July 10th, right? Now we're in Oklahoma City on July the 11th. Where were we on Sunday, July 12th?
Pittsburgh, Oklahoma City. From Oklahoma City, you're either in Minnesota or Florida.
You're incorrect. Baltimore, Maryland, ladies and gentlemen. About a 3.5-hour drive from Pittsburgh, I think is that 4 hours, maybe, whatever. Back in Baltimore at the arena, but the house was $146,000. So once again, that was close to a sellout in Baltimore. And we had one of our only Midnight Express versus original Freebirds matches ever with Michael and Buddy. And we won, by the way, with over Buddy Roberts with the racket. But that's like one of only 2 or 3 matches we ever had with the 2 of the original Freebirds. Just a 2-on-2 match is what I'm saying. Yeah. And also somehow Miss Atlanta Live. Oh, that's what it was. On the underneath card, I was supposed to face Miss Atlanta Lively, but since I was on crutches, Bobby filled in, and Garvin just knocked me down at the beginning, and as I just rolled out because I couldn't get up yet, and he beat up Bobby and pinned him. But he was as Miss Atlanta Lively. That was her last appearance, I believe, on record. And now that we have gone, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you keeping tabs, even though I wasn't there because of injury, we've gone from Lakeland, Florida to Landover, Maryland, to Richmond, Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia, Charleston, West Virginia, Los Angeles, California, San Francisco, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Cincinnati, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Oklahoma City, Baltimore on successive days. Where do you think we were on Monday, July 13th?
I don't want to have to guess again. Florida will be my guess again.
You are correct. West Palm Beach, Florida. The Rock and Roll Express for the World Tag Team Championship in front of a $55,000 house, which apparently was a record at that time in West Palm Beach.
Really? Wow.
And we got $500. Then the next day, since of course you're in that historic Florida territory, why not go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Where we wrestled Robert and Brad Armstrong, because Ricky had actually gotten hurt somehow the previous night, and I can't remember how. I believe it was. But anyway, Baton Rouge at the Centroplex, $23,000 house. So the Mid-South bloom was off the rose there. The July 15th, then we go from one end of the Mid-South Territory to the other, Little Rock, Arkansas, Barton Coliseum. This time it's Robert Gibson and Barry Windham against the Midnight Express, and a dismal non-recorded house. Mid-South was having its troubles. But Thursday, July 16th, the Great American Bash on tour in Freedom Hall in Johnson City, Tennessee. And in 5 years, the home of Smoky Mountain Wrestling in Johnson City. A $72,000 house to see the Bash on tour, and we defeated we lost to the Garvins, Roddy and Jimmy, by disqualification for the U.S. Tag Team Championship. Then, Friday, July 17th, Norfolk, Virginia, The Scope, $180,000 house. The biggest house so far of the whole Bash tour was in Norfolk, Virginia, the Crockett Territory. So naturally, they kept trying to leave the Crockett Territory. Once again, we got $1,000 that night, so that house would have been $400,000. Today, we'd have got $2,500, and we weren't even the main event by far on that one, I believe. And then Saturday, July 18th. Charlotte Memorial Stadium, another of the times that we actually faced the Freebirds, and we beat Buddy again. But we got a great record against the original Freebirds. But that was just on the card for our U.S. Tag Team title. That was, my God, I can't remember, but I think it wasn't a War Games main event, but it was a big Flair main event, etc., but at Memorial Stadium in Charlotte. And that house was down from 1985 and 86 and still did $174,000. And with the cheap tickets at the stadium, you're talking 15,000 people. And that was down because it had been like 23,000 the year before or whatever. But still, it's for a town you run every month. And we made $1,355. Crockett was like he sliced it all the way down to the nub for us, gave us every penny he could. Then, the next day, the only way we could do this was with Crockett's plane, right? We're in Charlotte, so at least we're home where we live that night. But Sunday morning, we get up, we go to the airport, the Butler Aviation section of Charlotte, where they had the private flights come in and out, and get there at like 11:30 or whatever, and get on Crockett's plane, and we fly, an hour and a half up to Roanoke, Virginia, and get there for a 2 o'clock show. It's the Bash on tour. It's a record $80,000 house at the Roanoke Civic Center. We made $800 a piece against the Rock and Roll Express. But then we had to immediately rush back to the airport and fly to Chicago. And this is how tight they timed this shit. We're just going from Eastern to Central Time. We've got a show in Roanoke from 2 to 4:30. You got to get back to the airport, jump on that plane. Boom, there's a couple of preliminaries maybe in Chicago in case of delay, but sometimes you're not changing clothes, right? And you go to Chicago, the UIC Pavilion, there's the Great American Bash on tour, a sold-out $136,000 house. And our payoff that night, because we were with the Rock and Roll Express in one of the feature matches, was $1,935 a piece. So people say Crockett didn't do good business in 87, but there was 4 shows in 3 days that grossed almost $600,000, and we personally made over $5,000 a piece just in those 3 days. But the fact that they scheduled that shit like that, if anything went wrong, thunderstorms, power outages, there used to be mishaps just like there are today, Brian. It's just we have more ways to find out about them now, but shit used to traffic jams. But this shit was timed right down to the fucking nub. And then Sunday night after Chicago, I believe that I flew back commercial, because there may not have been room on the plane, but we just had to be in Greenville, South Carolina. That was 2 hours from Charlotte. So you fly back from Chicago, go to your house, change your shit in your bag, and then go to fucking Greenville, which did $70,000. The house. We made $655 that night, 2 hours from Charlotte, against the Rock and Roll Express. and then finally had a day off. July 21st is the first day off that we had since, well, for the guys on the tour, it'd been the first day off of the month, and mine was for my surgery. Do you notice guys whining about the fact that they're always on the fucking road these days because they work Thursday through fucking Sunday or whatever?
I was just thinking that, because it's not just what you guys are doing with Crockett, but even like the WWF schedule back then, it was nuts. There were guys who did like afternoon shows on the East Coast and had to fly out to Los Angeles the same day to work the same day. Both companies, both companies.
Well, and it was worse with them. It was worse with the WWF because they had longer tours. They didn't have their own plane where you couldn't come back some nights to, your home base. So it was worse there. And, well, and once again, we get one day off the 21st, right? July 22nd, we do an Atlanta TV taping in Columbus, Georgia. And that did $16,000 for the TV taping. But then the July 23rd, the very next day, we're back to Dallas, Texas at Reunion Arena. And this is for the UWF tag team title with Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner. And the whole show at Reunion Arena, because once again, Fritz's territory was on its ass also, $72,000. And that's a major city arena. Our payout was $250 because they probably had to pay to get out of there. And then
I'm a single mom. I've had a lot of those imposter syndrome moments, but everyone deserves to be in that room. Everyone deserves to be able to self-work. My children watching me going through this journey means so much to me. I want to be a motivation for them. It's okay to stumble, but as long as you get back up and keep going, you're in the right place. Not only did I make myself proud, but I know I made my mother, my father, and my children truly proud to see that I actually did it. This is my comeback. Start yours today at PurdueGlobal.edu.
And then we went to Houston, Texas the next night. Listen to this match. They were trying to revive the UWF at that point or do whatever they were trying to do with it. But in Houston, Texas, the Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane, Big Bubba Rogers, and Black Bart, who was had a history in that town, against the Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts, and the Rock and Roll Express.
Wow.
And me and Skandor Akbar in a small cage at ringside. That was one of the mini matches along with Ric Flair and whoever the fuck was there, blah, blah, blah. $34,000 at the Summit in Houston.
What was it like being a cellmate with Skandor Akbar?
No, it was quite pleasant. I liked Ak. He was a very, very witty man. But they were shooting deer in the balcony. It was just empty. In 1987, Texas was not the place to go to draw, or the whole Mid-South territory at that point. So we got $250 a piece. And then from Houston to Philadelphia, July 25th against the Rock and Roll, it's a lumberjack match with tennis rackets where we were defeated in front of a $150,000 house. The payoff was $1,145 a piece, but once again, that was pretty close to a sellout in the Civic Center, even at the bash prices. I think the scaffold match with the Midnight and the Road Warriors had set the Civic Center record previously at like $165,000 or something like that. Then the next day we went to Cleveland, Ohio, and they did this once a year for a couple of years. But it wasn't a bash, it was a short show at Municipal Stadium after the Cleveland Indians baseball game. And that's where some of the pictures that you have seen of me and Bob Eaton and Stan Lane and the Rock and Roll Express in a baseball stadium with a lot of people there, but also you can see there's a lot of people ain't there. What is it, fucking 80,000 seat stadium? But that's where that came from, because we did it after the ball game, and that's when they told me to go out and kill time while they were setting the ring up. And I got the people so right. I said the last people the Indians beat was Custer. And, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who can you boast of being from Cleveland in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Eric Carmen, you bunch of wimps, right? And they started throwing so much shit at me, security had to take me off the fucking field. Anyway.
Eric Carmen.
So it was a $50,000 sold show deal. So we each got $1,000 for going there and playing around in the stadium that afternoon.
Hey, Jim, that reminds me, this bash tour in '87, I don't recall if they were still doing musical guests at certain shows, were they?
No. Well, and I don't. There may have been one or two. There may have been some in Charlotte that year. I mean, the ones that it would have been a few of them, and they would have been targeted. They didn't have Delbert McClinton in fucking Philadelphia again. It just. I mean, it was a good idea. It really was, and I copied it to some extent in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, except I didn't use any name bands that I had to pay any money to. But the concept of music and wrestling and, you know, outdoors and fireworks and stuff, that was great. Dusty just overreached and was hiring Waylon Jennings, and it wasn't necessary. They didn't add in their own world. None of those country music fans were coming to see those people unless they wanted to see the wrestling. But a lot of wrestling fans were coming that didn't care whether the country music folks were on it or not. Therefore, they were not selling the tickets, but they were getting an inordinate part of the money. I think after the first year, they came to that conclusion. Anyone had to pull the plug on, who the fuck was it George Jones in Jacksonville, or was it, who was it that I can never remember. I can't tell, but they all look alike to me.
Well, we found out. We got the answer, and I forgot what we determined.
Forgot what we found out, yeah. But anyway, Monday, July 27th. That's where we left off. We go once again from Cleveland, Ohio to Fayetteville, North Carolina against Barry and Kendall Windham, who we defeated, thank goodness. But $88,000 in Fayetteville, North Carolina at the Cumberland County Memorial Arena that Crockett had been running once every 2 weeks, if not once a month, since the dawn of time. Did an $88,000 house, and we made $600. Whereas we had just gone to Houston, Texas, did a house less than half of that, and we made less than half that. And Fayetteville, North Carolina outdrew Dallas, Texas. Fayetteville, North Carolina outdrew, as you'll recall, Los Angeles and goddamn San Francisco. That's what when Flair talks about, and some guys talk about, if Crockett had just never gone west of the Mississippi, that's a simplification of it. But there were a lot of places that we were going that we should, that it would have been better to go to Gaffney, South Carolina and gross 30 grand at the ball field than go to Los Angeles and gross 80 grand at the Forum. I think everybody can understand that, right?
Yeah.
Because of the fact that you will have money left over in Gaffney, but not in Los Angeles when you're at a fucking NBA arena. Anyway, I digress. So then we almost had a day off July 28th because we're in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is 20 miles from Charlotte. And it's a regular house show against Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin, just a nice 30-minute Broadway. But it was only half an hour, you know, in the car to get there, so that's like a day. And we made $120 because it was a non-bash show at the end of the month in Rock Hill after we'd just drawn 18,000 people in Charlotte 20 miles up the road 2 weeks before. So we went down there and went a half an hour for $120. We weren't even getting paid as much per hour as a fucking plumber at that rate, I don't think. Then July 29th was an Atlanta TV taping at the Atlanta studios. We did 2 of those. And then the 30th was back in Jacksonville, Florida, but this time at the Coliseum, not the Gator Bowl, against the Rock and Roll Express. And Jacksonville, Florida did $92,000, and we made $600. And then the July 31st was the Orange Bowl in Miami, where we made $800. They still should have gone indoors in Miami, but the fact is there was a lot of people there if it had been an indoor building. So you're seeing that basically the Carolinas and Virginias and Floridas and Georgias, that portion of the business was strong. It was, and the Northeast that we had a foothold in, it was the Western expansion. Anyway, but then, speaking of the Western expansion, and by the way, July 31st, the Orange Bowl in Miami is where Bubba was the war machine to take the place in the second War Games, take the place at J.J. Dillon, because Hawk broke fucking J.J.'s shoulder with that doomsday device in the first War Games. Anyway, the Orange Bowl in Florida, July 31st. August 1st was New Orleans, Louisiana in the Superdome. And we faced, once again, Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner for the UWF Tag Team Championship, and I believe it says it was a reverse decision, where at first we won, but then we didn't. Guess what the house was in the Superdome in New Orleans, Brian, last?
Oh my God, summer of '87.
Yeah.
There's no way. I hate to say there would be maybe 3,000 people there, but I don't know what the gate would be.
Well,
that would be low.
$42,000. So I think you're probably right about the 3,000 some, if that. Yeah.
How much do you think the expenses were to turn on the lights in the Superdome?
More than that. Well, I know that when we drew $173,000 in April, the last Stampede, April of 1984. Jack Curtis showed me the check made out to Mid-South Sports after rent, building expenses, ticketing, everything they had to pay the Superdome. They left with 126. So that was $46,000 or $47,000 that they paid in some respect. But anyway, we got $400 and we're happy to get the fuck out of there. But listen, once again, here's these last few days. July 30th, Jacksonville, Florida. July 31st, Miami, Florida. August 1st, New Orleans, Louisiana. August 2nd, Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock in Huntington, West Virginia. Against the Rock and Roll, we did $34,000. So we did, in Huntington, West Virginia, 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, we did 34 grand as opposed to 42 in the Superdome in New Orleans, and our payoff was $50 more in Huntington. And then that night, we went to Charlotte, our home, and I don't have the house recorded, but it was Rock and Roll bunkhouse match, and the payoff was $575, so I'm figuring that was a mid-level house of about 40-something grand in Charlotte. But once again, they go to the Orange Bowl and the Superdome in 2 days in a row and gross more money in Charlotte and Huntington, West Virginia the next 2 days, or in the same day. And then finally we had a day off on Monday, August 3rd, and that whole fucking tour through hysteria had come to an end. And as I see, and I just, on August 6th, I got my $400 knee brace that had to be custom made so that I could walk, because that was the fucking big issue, was that when I went back on the road, because I didn't want to miss any more of those big shows, and that Baltimore show, and they're going to be not only big payoffs, but I hated to miss the fucking things. But the leg was still, 10 days from having it scoped, so it was still, and tearing it violently, so it was still swollen up, and when I'd either sit on a plane, it would swell because I wasn't putting any weight on it, or when I would put too much weight on it, like walking through a giant long airport concourse, it was a fucking rib, right? And you could dick around and try to get one of those carts, and the boys would make fun of you, and also you'd probably miss the shit because if you were flying commercial, it was split-second timing. It was a little better on Crockett's plane, but that I didn't have time to do any physical therapy because I'm fucking doing that goddamn schedule. When exactly was I going to go and devote a couple hours to actually doing the shit I was supposed to be doing? So I think that's one of the reasons why it was never one of my favorite knees after that. But it was even though I was getting paid, half price sometimes, which in those days was unusual. If it had been any other territory, it probably would have happened. But we kind of shamed Crockett on that one, and they were doing such business. But in those days, you just wanted to get back. You did not want to miss. It diminished everything if I was not there to Midnight Express. When what we were presenting on TV. And if the stipulations revolved around me, so we felt bad about that shit in those days. And now it's just like cards subject to change, and nobody takes it seriously when something's advertised.
Everything you just said really makes you think about the whole idea of survival plan for Crockett Promotions. If they had run the entire East Coast, because by that point Florida was done and they had taken over that, and they had run as far north as, I think, Boston, and not gone too far west. Stayed the fuck out of the Mid-South territory.
They should have stayed out of everything north of Philadelphia, too. Boston wasn't worth it for the fucking... The law of diminishing returns up there, too. Concede that to Vince and build your... The economy would have revived, because wrestling was popular in Texas and Louisiana. The idea of wrestling, the concept of wrestling was popular. It was just that the economy was depressed, and the original one territory had gone out of business and been bought by Crockett, and the other territory the Von Erich scandals had, just left a bad taste, but eventually interest would come back there. If they'd have joined that with everything, fucking that they had on the Eastern Seaboard, they could have cooperated with Jerry Jarrett if they wanted to in Memphis, or just stayed the fuck away from that because they weren't going to do any big business without Jarrett and Lawler. But they had a lot of room, and Chicago was still doing. It wasn't even until Starrcade that they managed to fuck up Chicago that year when they left Greensboro, where they could do 3 times as much of a gross, or twice as much of a gross, and tons more people, to go to Chicago, and then gave them a bad finish and killed Chicago after 7 straight sellouts. So it was not a great year with some of the decisions, but they had a still solid business in the territories they should have been running in.
If they had just stuck to Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Greensboro, Charlotte, Atlanta, and I guess you could throw Miami in there.
Well, no, really, the whole Florida territory, because Florida was still Eddie Graham style wrestling at that time, and that was fit more closely by the NWA and Crockett and etc. Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, West Virginia. As soon as the economy came back around in places like Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and Texas, also Chicago and a few places in the Midwest, Baltimore, Philly, D.C. as was the capital center. And with it, Vince had run for years almost exclusively, did almost $200,000. So there was, in that entire area, Ohio was, Michigan even could have been competition. And but Crockett just started going everywhere. And as you can see, not only going everywhere, but how much money did it cost to transport people back and forth across the fucking country, whether private planes or commercial, like goddamn, drunken wombats. It was fucking ludicrous.
Yeah, and it stands out when you talk about the house shows and what those gates were. It's like, wow, if you would really just run those major cities, mostly on the East Coast, and then hit those house show towns and just kept the booking up, which, Dusty and his booking at that point in time is a whole other discussion, but it seems like that would have been a plan for survival. Stay away from the UWF purchase. And Dallas, look, you got to remember, too, Dallas, beyond the tragedies, Ken Mantell goes to the UWF, takes all the top Dallas talent, not named Von Erich, and then they start running in Dallas. And as good as the matches are, the most depressing show ever is Power Pro Wrestling from '86, because it's like an empty Fort Worth. There's no one there.
Oh God. Fort Worth was a depressing atmosphere to do work and do TV in when somebody was there. Unless the whole place was sold out. I saw that once or twice with Flair and Carey on top. Otherwise, it was just dreary on a Monday night to begin with. But yeah, and once again, that's the issue, is that Crockett just didn't have the structure, the infrastructure in place in the office and everything to expand and chase Vince. He was being told by all these people that he had to run big markets and establish the brand in big markets, and the TV revenue would be the saving grace of everything. So they didn't actually really have a survival plan then, because they didn't know they were getting in trouble then. As you recall, they didn't know they were in trouble until spring of '88, even though what they did in '87 is what got them in trouble.
Yeah.
So, but the business, I always try to point out that the business, even when people said, in '87 things took a dip. Well, September we went back to Norfolk and did 55 grand. Detroit in September did 111. That was for that Ronnie Garvin and fucking Flair title change. There was still good business in different places. It's just the schedule toward the end of the year got so diluted and had so many TV tapings because they'd absorbed so many territories, and they were running more TV tapings than they were major arenas, so they were losing that revenue from 6 months before to fill up all that goddamn television time.
Yeah, because at that time you had, beyond the TBS show, you still had the Crockett syndicated shows. You had Florida TV they'd taken over. You had everything that was a part of the UWF syndicated package, Power Pro Wrestling, Mid-South Wrestling. You had Kansas City.
Kansas City. There was a TV in Kansas City for a while, yes. It was ridiculous. And trying to put a history of the programs together, or I don't mean the television programs, I mean the angles between people. the rivalries, the programs, and the things, it was all over the page because they were just sending different talent to these different TVs, and it just, it was, you were doing TV more often than you were doing house shows toward the end of the year, and it just got stupid. But once again, in Baltimore in October, still was $93,000 house.
And then the other issue is they, in one form or another, began neglecting some of those big cities. When you took Starrcade out of Greensboro, you offended those hardcore Greensboro fans.
Yeah.
When you brought it to Chicago and then had the Road Warriors not win the tag titles, you alienated those fans. It was, that was the problem. You didn't take care of those big markets that really could support you.
And just for example, on October 13th, we did 2 hours of syndicated TV, Crockett syndicated TV in Shelby, North Carolina. Then on Wednesday, we did 2 Atlanta TV shows, and on Thursday, we did 2 more Atlanta TV shows as we were on tour the next week.
Jeez.
Got a day off on Friday the 16th, and in Baltimore did 93 grand on October 17th. Then we came back to Roanoke, Virginia that afternoon of Sunday, and then Atlanta at the Omni that Sunday night, which was horrible. That's when Atlanta business kind of sucked. And then started doing TV again. We did TV on Tuesday again that week, and then went to Florida to fulfill some of those commitments. The following weekend, we were Charlotte, North Carolina on Friday night, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on Saturday, and then Greensboro, 60 miles up the road from Charlotte, on Sunday night. And none of them really did very good by that point. So
I mean, you're throwing away money with that travel schedule. Even if you want to hit those towns that ended up not being that successful, hit them all in one butt. Why are you bouncing from one place back to the other? I mean, it just makes no sense.
I think they just, I know it's hard to schedule things, but that was what was going on basically. So anyway, you know what? We've had so much fun. The next time we're gonna have to do the Bunkhouse Stampede. That was a whole other kettle of fucking fish.
Oh boy, you want to go to the direction of fun, I guess.
Yeah, there you go, for alternative fun. All right, I think we've about exhausted that fucking topic. The Great American Bash 1987. Should we go back, Brian? Should we go back, and on this January morning, should we look back when things were still the way they should be?
That sounds promising.
No, January 1988. Because I thought 30 years ago, let's go back and see what was going on, at least in my world of wrestling. But as we know, the territories were starting to falter. A lot of them were going by the wayside. I think, was it 89 was the year Continental went away?
Yes.
But 88, it was starting to feel that, and even Crockett's business was starting to go down. With the end of 87, business has started to slack off, and it wasn't until the Great American Bash Tour of 88 that things came back, and that's when David and Francis and Jackie tried to get Jim Crockett not to sell because business had come back, but by then it was too late. But that late 87 through mid 88 period, where the TV revenue from the syndication network, commercial revenue didn't come in as it was supposed to. Vince had sabotaged Crockett and blocked him off pay-per-view. He had to get Turner Broadcasting involved to get the Great American Bash 88 on pay-per-view that year. So it was kind of a down period, but when you look back on it today, it's still, it's like, oh my God, if things could only be that good again. But I looked back in January 1988, the Midnight Express and I made $7,000 a piece that month, which was probably the worst month that we had for Jim Crockett Promotions since we'd come in 85. And of course, that's equivalent to, I think it's $14,700 and something or whatever today, but still from what we were used to. And of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we had 7 days off that month because it was freak winter weather in the Carolinas. We were snowed out a couple of days, so 7 days off in a month was unheard of at that point in time. But the money was not too good, but there were some interesting things that happened. Would you like to, I haven't even opened the book any further yet. I wanted to re-experience this with you. Would you like to take a look at it?
Let's take a look at it. I'm thinking of a few January 88 items you may touch on.
Well, January 1st, was the Atlanta Omni, New Year's Day as always. And the main event was a cage match for a wild card spot for the Bunkhouse Stampede Finals. Because you remember every year during December for a few years there, Dusty ran the Bunkhouse Stampedes, and whoever won the most of them would be the Bunkhouse Stampede champion. And there was always some doubt. Like in '87, it was Dusty and Big Bubba Rogers had tied, and they had to go in the cage in Pittsburgh and settle the thing. And that was, sell out 16,600 people, $165,000 house. It's still the most people that have ever seen a wrestling match in the city of Pittsburgh, indoors at least. I think they ran some outdoor shows in the 60s. For Dusty and Bubba, and Dusty won the Bunkhouse Stampede. Well, it was a wild card for the Bunkhouse Finals that were going to be held on pay-per-view. And in the Omni, it was Beautiful Bobby Eaton, Dusty Rhodes, Dick Murdoch, Nikita Koloff, and Black Bart. I love Bart, but one of these things is not like the other in that list. And in the end, Dusty defeated Bobby. You had to throw the guy over the cage or out the door, right? So I'd thrown the racket in to Bobby, and he got some heat on Dusty with the racket, and he got Dusty, and you've never lived until you've seen somebody try to get Dusty Rhodes up on not only the top rope, but to throw him over the top of the cage. But Bobby was trying, and he couldn't do it, so I threw the racket up again, but Dusty got it instead and grabbed the racket and hammered Bobby with it several times and knocked him off the top of the cage to the floor, so he won. Dusty Rhodes going to the Bunkhouse Finals in front of a $78,000 house, and that was down. That was probably only about 8,000 people, whereas traditionally New Year's did better in Atlanta. The following day was Asheville, North Carolina, at the Asheville Civic Center, and once again it was. I don't want to say Dusty had just kind of lost grip on the booking, but he was doing some different things and some stranger things. And in this case, Bobby was against Nikita Koloff for the World TV title, and Stan was just on a single match on the card against Todd Champion, who he defeated. But then Bobby put Nikita over for with the TV title on the line. But splitting the Midnight Express up, we did a lot of singles that month, and it was just odd. And the house was only $10,200. Then January 3rd, we went to Baltimore for a TV taping. It was the A&B syndicated shows, Worldwide and NWA Pro. And that was the famous night. It was $72,000 in Baltimore, which wasn't even in those prices. Those days wasn't even 7,000 people. It was a horrible, horrible house. But they had advertised TV taping with a couple of dark matches. So, But that was the night that on the A show, Worldwide Wrestling, Dick Murdoch challenged Nikita Koloff for the World TV title, and they went 20 minutes Broadway. Do you remember me telling you a story?
Yeah, I think so.
we were sitting in the back, and it's like, and bless Nikita, but we got the finish, and we're like, what the fuck? Because Nikita was not at that time an accomplished wrestler that's going to go, a 20-minute draw in a cold match. I was like, Christ, and Murdoch's like, there's going to be shit. So I said, you know something, Dick? I said, every single person in that locker room, every single one of the boys, thinks there's no way you can have a good fucking match with Nikita Koloff going 20-minute Broadway. They do? I said, yeah. I heard a couple of them talking about it. There's no way this match is going to stink, is what it's... Oh, they think that, huh? That was the best Nikita Koloff match that he ever wrestled. If you go back and look at it, I think this aired on January 16th, 1988 by my notes on Worldwide Wrestling, but Murdoch versus Nikita 20-minute Broadway. Now, I'm not saying it was Flair and Steamboat, but it was the best Nikita Koloff single match probably that was ever held. And because I challenged Dickie, because he was going to sit down. I could see, because he was just like... And so I challenged him a little bit to step up, and he did it by a cracky. But that was, once again, $72,000 house, TV taping, we made $200, right? Because we weren't advertising the dark matches. And then I believe, because January 4th is off, I can't remember, but we got snowed in one time in Baltimore. That may have been it. Then January 5th, Spartanburg, South Carolina, Midnight Express versus Sting and Ron Simmons. who we defeated because they weren't a full-time tag team. It was just, but once again, the house was $4,200 in Spartanburg. That was not even 500 people. And I don't know why that anybody thought the Midnight Express versus Sting and Ron Simmons was going to draw any money at that point in time. But anyway, that's the match we had, and we beat them with a double team maneuver. And then went on to Atlanta, where we had started doing the Atlanta TBS shows for Saturday and Sunday. We'd started, instead of Saturday mornings, we started taping them on some Wednesday nights. So that not only took another night away from a paying gig, but also it took 2 nights away from a paying gig. Because used to we'd do Atlanta TV on Saturday morning and then do a house show on Saturday night, and we'd do a house show on Wednesday. This time, so it was odd, and I never really. I think it may have had something to do with TBS not wanting to bring their crew in on Saturday mornings anymore. But on that particular night, January 6th, we accepted the Midnight Express, accepted the Tag Team of the Year award from Bill Apter, and we had a couple of matches, and I was managing Dick at the time also, and he had a couple of matches. We did the Saturday and Sunday show and got paid a whopping $40, which is what you got paid for Atlanta TV in those days. Then we were off on the 7th. Then we were also off on the 8th because we were supposed to be in Newton, North Carolina, but we got snowed out. This is going to be a recurring theme here. Saturday, January 9th, we were in Huntington, West Virginia at the beautiful Huntington Civic Center. The main event, Midnight Express versus Dusty Rhodes and Nikita Koloff in a cage match. $20,000 house.
Oh.
Yes. Barely I'm telling you, business was... January and February, we made $7,000 on each of those months, and that's why in March we went in and talked to Crockett about our new contracts, which we ended up signing, which made us the most unpopular people on the roster when TBS bought the company, because our new contracts were for $225,000 a year apiece. And because he thought all that pay-per-view revenue was going to be coming in and all the syndicated TV revenue was going to be coming in, and it didn't come in. But anyway, so we got $445, which I guess would be almost $1,000 in today's money, but on the $20,000 house because we were in the main event, but still. Of course, we put them over. And then the following day, Sunday, January 10th, Greenville, South Carolina, Memorial Auditorium, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Listen to this. We were booked against Ronnie Garvin and the Mighty Wilbur. But thank God something happened, and Sting replaced the Mighty Wilbur. So Sting and Garvin, we got disqualified. Greenville, South Carolina, Brian, the house, $2,800.
How?
300 people. Part of it was weather, because as you recall, we were just snowed out 100 miles down the road the day before. It was a horrible weather month that month, but part of it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday when there was a Monday night town, half a card because, it was just the B team on the lineup, and the Greenville had been damaged. And so, yeah, I think that's the all-time low in the history of Greenville, South Carolina. But we went that night back to Charlotte at the Coliseum where we had another TV taping. See, that's the thing. Here's another thing that affected the houses and the gates in a lot of these major markets, because Crockett had for years been doing TV tapings in little high school and college gyms within 100, 125 miles of Charlotte. Gaffney, South Carolina. Spartanburg was a big TV location. Meisenheimer, North Carolina, where we helped Tully and Arn beat the Rock and Roll for the tag team titles the previous September. We would do 1,500, 2,000 people in those little gyms. They'd be sold out, sometimes sold out in advance, because the people never got to see live action. But then putting all of their biscuits in the same basket, they were trying to do TV tapings in major arenas because they had been told and led to believe, and Crockett had been led to believe, that TV tapings and the syndicated revenue and the, like Vince, let's do what Vince is doing. So they started doing TV tapings in major arenas, and they'd advertise 1 or 2 dark matches, and the rest of it is see the stars of TV taping. So you wouldn't have a full card. People didn't know what they were going to fucking see. And they're used to these cards that were 4 and 5 and 6 matches deep in big cities like Charlotte and Greensboro and Baltimore and Atlanta, with grudge matches and title matches. And now, even if they got main event matches on TV, the people who had seen TV tapings knew that they would be shorter matches, and you would have to sit through a lot of squashes with the Italian Stallion, so they weren't coming. I don't even have the house for Charlotte down. We got paid $280, so it wasn't very good, and we had a 6-man tag with Dickie in the Midnight against Brad Armstrong, Tim Horner, and the Italian Stallion. And then we were in the cage against Dusty and Nikita on the B show, which was a short cage match with no finish, where Murdoch had run got the key from the referee, run into the cage, and they had to run us off with the troops. So it was TV matches, non-finishes in major arenas, was not helping at all. Monday, January 11th, we were supposed to be in Fayetteville. We could not be there. We were stuck in the fucking snow. As a matter of fact, I think that is the day that I actually pulled out of my driveway on the street that I lived on, turned left, slid sideways into a ditch, and stayed there. So I got like literally 65 feet from my house. And in North Carolina, it's snow of 6 and 8 and 9 and 10 inches. It closes the whole fucking city down, right? So I don't know if they ran the show, but I couldn't make it. January 12th, North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. Nice little spot show against Ronnie Garvin and Sting. Of course, they beat us because it was a spot show. Why not? $10,200 house. Well, not bad for a Tuesday night spot show, but that's where we should have been doing the television taping. If we're in towns like we used to. Then Wednesday, January 13th, we go back to Atlanta for another TV taping on a Wednesday night. And once again, we've got to fly down to Atlanta, take a fucking taxi to not Center Stage time, but to TBS. And then, at least we had Crockett's Plane where we could get back that night, but blah. Thursday, January 14th, we were going to be against the Garvins in Fisherville, Virginia. But that, I believe, I've got it scratched out. So either the show was canceled for snow or whatever, rerouted, but we were off that night. Friday night, January 15th, we go to Richmond, Virginia, one of the biggest cities and most the biggest box office cities in the Crockett territory. And guess what we did? An Atlanta TV taping for January 23rd. $55,000 house, about 5,500 people, let's say. And that's a Bobby had tweaked his knee, so he had to take several days off, which is one of the only times I remember Bobby taking time off. So it was Stan Lane and Dick Murdoch against Dusty and Nikita in the cage. And then we did a tag match with Dickie and Stan on TV. And, we were in a dark match. We got $475 payoff, but, blah. Then the next day we go to Philadelphia, where it was supposed to be Dusty and Bobby. But since Bobby was hurt, it became Dusty and Stan, who Dusty beat Stan with a crossbody. And that was a pretty goddamn decent house. I don't have it recorded, but we made $825. Then, listen to this one. We've been in Richmond, Virginia on Friday night for a glorified TV taping, right? We go to Philadelphia on Saturday, January 16th for a pretty good house. Sunday afternoon, we're in Charleston, West Virginia for another TV taping, where we basically did a match and an interview and an interview on the B show, and got paid $75 because Charleston sucked because we weren't in a dark match and it was a TV taping. And then we took Crockett's Plane, jumped in the fucking car, or jumped in a cab, went to the airport, took the Crockett's Plane to St. Louis that night. So we went from Richmond to Philadelphia to Charleston on Sunday afternoon, St. Louis Sunday night. And I managed Dick Murdoch against Dusty in the main event, which was kind of a fucking thrill to manage Dick Murdoch against Dusty Rhodes. And basically, disqualification finish, and it was a $400 payoff. I do not have the house recorded, but that wasn't anything special. And from being in St. Louis on Sunday night, Monday, we're back in Columbia, South Carolina, where I managed Murdoch against Sting. And we got disqualified, and $150 payoff because Columbia was, and plus, once again, the weather outside was frightful. Then this was an interesting. Originally, we were scheduled on Tuesday, January 19th, to be off because it was supposed to be a travel day, because that's when they had set up a 2-day tour of the West Coast, and originally we were booked on it, but thank God they took us off. Honolulu, Hawaii, on Wednesday, January 20th at the Blaisdell Arena. Now, I don't know if they ran that show or not. I think they did. But we were taken off and put back on the Carolina team because they had so much talent, they'd run 2 towns a night. But think about this, if we'd have had to, we would have flown all day on Tuesday, January 19th to get to Hawaii in time to get up the next day and basically eat lunch and go to the building and work, and then the following day they came back to Los Angeles and ran the Forum. And then we're back the following day and then came back to the Carolinas. So we got taken off, and that is also, by the way, when Bubba left. Because you'll recall that Bubba got his payoff about this time for the Starrcade 87 scaffold match with the Rock and Roll and the Midnight. And we all got $10,000 apiece. Well, Bubba was not in the match, but he climbed the scaffold and fucked around a little spot with Ricky up there, and he was part of the team. He got $5,000. And that's around about the first of the year is when he got his check. That's when he called Vince and became Hulk Hogan's arch rival in one of the biggest house show runs they ever had. So originally it was supposed to be the Midnight and Bubba against the Rock and Roll and Dr. Death in Hawaii and Los Angeles, but Bubba was gone. At that time, the Rock and Roll had left, possibly over the same fucking reason, because they like I can't remember why they left. So all this shit was falling apart, right? Normally I do good months, but this was a sucky month. So anyway, we got a day off instead of having to fly to Hawaii for no apparent reason. And then while they were in Hawaii, we were in Georgetown, South Carolina, against Ronnie Garvin and Jimmy Valiant, and the house did $16,000 in Georgetown, and we made $300 fucking dollars. And then the next day we were in Chesterfield, South Carolina, against Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin, and the house did almost $10,000, and we got another 125 or whatever. So we actually came out on the better end of that. January 22nd was Elberton, Georgia, where we were originally booked against the Rock and Roll Express, but since they were gone, no, Ricky left. That's what it was. Ricky left first because we worked with Robert Gibson and Barry Windham. And that house in Elberton, Georgia was $11,300. We made a couple of $100. So as you see, the Carolina spot shows were doing, adjusted for rent, as good or better as towns like fucking St. Louis. And they still couldn't figure this out. Then January 23rd, Lakeland, Florida. Midnight Express versus Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham. We were disqualified, and a $50,000 bounty match, Murdoch versus Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty won. $20,000 in Lakeland. Not bad. But you remember I talked about that Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view?
Yep.
Here's the way they routed us. We'd been in Elberton, Georgia on Friday night, January 22nd. Then we're in Lakeland, Florida on Saturday night, January 23rd. Sunday, January 24th was the Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view at the Nassau Coliseum in Long Island. We went literally as far as you can go from south to north in the United States the day of a pay-per-view. Had to get from the airport to the Nassau Coliseum and set up and go. And if you'll recall, that was what was universally panned as the worst Crockett Big Show ever, right? You remember that?
Oh, easily, yeah.
The Midnight Express didn't even have a match as a tag team on the show. It was Bobby versus Nikita for the TV title, and Stan versus Jimmy Garvin in a match that was scratched because they found out they only had like a 2.5 hour window or whatever, and scratched a couple of the prelim matches. So the house in the Nassau Coliseum did $80,000. We had no business being in New York. That was Vince's town. We should have never even fucking tried it. That was the first time I'd ever been in the Nassau Coliseum. The people were so cold and so miserable. It was like somebody had held a gun to them to come in. They reacted to nothing. Not that Bobby and Nikita gave me anything to react to, because Bobby was trying, but he didn't do the job that Dickie did with Nikita. 20-minute Broadway on pay-per-view in a cold match with Nikita Koloff for the TV title. So at any rate, I hated New York from that point on. It was not our. It was like I learned in Boston when we had the Rock and Roll Express and Heavenly Body Smoky Mountain Tag title match there, and they had probably the best tag team match that had been seen on WWF television in years at that point, and the people were like, bleh. And then here comes Doink the Clown and a bunch of midgets dressed like fucking Doink, and the place went berserk. We were in enemy territory. They didn't get fucking wrestling there. They got sports entertainment. And we never should have made the... Anyway, I bet they had to pay to get out of the building that night, much less the fucking talent pay. Now, that was also a pay-per-view, so back then, you didn't get your money for a couple months, right? And that was a pay-per-view that was sabotaged. It wasn't as bad as the Survivor Series 87, where only... Or not Survivor, but Starrcade 87, where because of the Survivor Series, only like 5 or 6 cable companies carried our pay-per-view. They got a few more... But we saw with that Drismal house, 80 grand in prices up there in those days, that was probably 5,000 people or whatever. And we're thinking, well, this is going to be miserable. We're going to get nothing. We ended up getting 5 grand for that fucking shitty match. I guess Crockett was embarrassed. It was an embarrassment payoff. But that was the beginning of the end. After that, we didn't do another pay-per-view until June, Great American Bash, and that's when Turner Broadcasting had exerted some muscle and got us full clearances and etc. But that's because they were in talks to buy the company.
And again, you had the Royal Rumble, the first Royal Rumble running against that pay-per-view.
Oh yeah, and that's right, and that was the Royal Rumble was against that one. So, and people have actually said that Vince didn't sabotage Crockett's efforts to get on pay-per-view. And I've heard that from several places. I'm like, fuck, was everybody blind, deaf, and dumb? That's exactly what he did, including going to the cable companies and saying, if you carry this guy's pay-per-view, I won't let you have WrestleMania. And of course, he was like Trump blathering out of his ass. He didn't mean it, and they all got to carry WrestleMania anyway, whoever carried the NWA pay-per-view. But still, that, yes, he blocked. That's why Crockett went under. Not because of the, even though this booking from January 88, you can't tell. But between the TV syndicated revenue not being what it was and being blocked off a pay-per-view when he thought this was going to be a gold mine, turned out to be a landmine. That's what happened. Vince sabotaged him. Anyway, so we leave New York, thankfully to God, on Sunday, January 24th. We leave there the next morning, and we're in Fayetteville on Monday night, Fayetteville, North Carolina, against the Garvins, $5,400 house. Now, Fayetteville, by the way, was where, for example, the Great American Bash 86 did $101,000 to see Ric Flair versus Robert Gibson for the world title. Fayetteville had been a Crockett town going back for 40 and 50 years, but Monday night, half a card. Then Tuesday, we go to Raleigh, North Carolina, for another TV taping. We had cameras up our asses everywhere we went for no money. Because all these TV taping payoffs were dismal unless you were figuring the dark match. And even then, it wasn't what a normal payoff for the town would have been because people didn't want to come see the TV tapings. So that night, we had a 6-man tag with Nick Murdoch, and then Bobby challenged Dusty for the U.S. title. That was the one people have tweeted that lately. Where basically there was a reverse decision. But then Dusty knocked Bobby out of the ring and grabbed me and slapped me around and broke my glasses. So that helped us keep some heat there. Anyway, January 27th, guess what we did? TV. Atlanta TV, the Saturday and Sunday show. One of the shows was the deal with Misty Blue, where she said, oh, I'd love to learn how to come off the top rope like Bobby Eaton and do all the stuff that Bobby Eaton does. I'm like, well, I can teach you. And she's giving me the finger up under the chin, and I get in the ring and she drop kicks me. And then Dusty and Barry Windham reveal her as the mystery partner for the upcoming show in Baltimore. So that was fun, but we made $40. And then Thursday, January 28th, we were supposed to be in Harrisonburg, Virginia against Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner, and I've got off, and I believe that may have been a snow situation also. I'm not sure, but we weren't there. January 29th, Pittsburgh, the Civic Center, the Igloo, Bob Eaton versus Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty went over, and Stan versus Ricky Santana in just a single match on the cards. Once again, $60,000 house, which was great, for what we've been seeing, and we made $650, but and then Saturday, January 30th, finally, thank fucking Christ, Greensboro, North Carolina. It was a TV taping, but they had advertised a couple of dark matches. I think Flair was in something important, possibly against Barry Windham. And we did a $105,000 house, so about 10,000 people. Greensboro was back where it ought to be. And the main event that we were figured in was a double bull rope match with the Midnight Express against Dusty and Nikita, which they won, of course. And then also, fucking Dusty defended the U.S. title on TV against Bobby again. And we won by countout but then Dusty made his own comeback. No, I'm sorry, we won by countout. But then Dusty made his own comeback and then rolled Bobby up, and the referee counted 3 anyway. You see a pattern here. So we made $1,100 that night, and we were off on January 31st. So we've given you the highs of Jim Crockett Promotions and some of those old days, but that was a dismal, suck-ass fucking month. And by the way, that Baltimore, hold on, let me skip ahead. When was Baltimore? The one that that's right. Baltimore was February 12th, Lincoln's birthday, where we shot that Misty Blue thing for. It wasn't a TV taping, thank God. And the main event was a cage match with me, Dick Murdoch, and the Midnight Express against Dusty, Nikita, Barry Windham, and Misty Blue. That was the main event in Baltimore. The only time we ever had that match. In a snowstorm, once again. We got there, it was 4 inches of fucking snow, and it was still coming down. And I'm like, oh, fuck, right? We did a $103,000 house, made $1,000 a piece. Maybe Misty didn't, I'm not sure. But that was an example of, when they really want to see it, they'll come. But looking back, I think Dusty was starting to get burned a little bit, and he'd had people leave, and he'd had to change his booking on several occasions, and the whole pay-per-view thing going up in fucking flames. And January, February, March, and April, especially April, as I recall, at that time, it was horrible. And that's when they went into talks with TBS. But then all of a sudden, as they were in the talks, as soon as the end of June came around, and that bash tour, and it was the biggest bash tour that we'd had. I think we've gone over it before. But it's the biggest bash tour we'd had. We worked like 42 and 45 days. The houses were incredible. We set some records. And that's when, as I'm just looking through, Norfolk, Virginia, $105,000. Charlotte Memorial Stadium, $100,000. That one wasn't good. Should have been $200,000. Greenville, South Carolina, $61,000. Orlando, Florida, $83,000. Amarillo, $50,000. Miami, $58,000. Raleigh, $101,000 sellout. Pittsburgh, $80,000. Baltimore, $206,000 for the pay-per-view. Chicago, $100,000. Huntsville, Alabama did $31,000. Chattanooga did $83,000. Richmond did $109,000. Greensboro did $100,000. That month, Cincinnati, $84,000. Philadelphia, $147,000. St. Louis, $81,000. Fayetteville, $66,000. Savannah, Georgia, $58,000 that never drew. Jacksonville, $66,000. Detroit, $103,000. Landover, Maryland, $157,000. Seattle, Washington, $96,000. Oakland, California, $98,000. So the point is, by that summer, he put us back in tag team matches, and we'd gone through the program with the Fantastics, and we're about to start with Tully and Arn. Gotten some new talent in. Booking was back on track. People were starting to come out. And it was too late. They'd already got so far in the hole from that miscalculation over the pay-per-view and the television business. And truthfully and honestly, some suck-ass cards and way too many TV tapings everywhere that nobody wanted to see. It was too late. And as a matter of fact, even off the Great American Bash that year, business got better. Because in September, when he could bring back Flair and Luger for the world title and started the program with Tully and Arn, the Bash in Richmond, as I believe I'd said, did $100,000, but in September, Richmond did $141,000. We sold the place pretty much slap dab out, and it was the all-time record gate. And it was 6 weeks later, they've sold the company to TBS. That's what I was going insane about. They're, in hindsight, if they hadn't had that 6 or 8 month period from late 87 through June of 88, it would have been a different ballgame. If they hadn't put so much thought into and put so much faith into pay-per-view and TV syndication revenue.
Well, Jim, Dusty gets a lot of blame for the problems that would happen to the company. His booking gets a lot of blame, and, look, for the most part, to be honest, his booking, there were a lot of holes in it as late 87 into 88, that time period was taking place. But when you look back at the big picture and you see, like you said, Vince was able to keep them off pay-per-view. Dusty and the booking was an issue, but the real issue seems to be the overall office, or lack thereof,
the business
of an office, of Jim Crockett Jr. having an advisor who could tell him what's a good idea and what's not a good idea, and just a team of serious business professionals, as opposed to, oh, this guy's been around for years, he used to work for my dad.
Yeah, well, and Jimmy did one shoot interview here a few years ago where he basically said, hey, it was all my fault. Don't blame the fucking CPA, the accountant that was hopelessly in the hole and over his head. Don't blame everybody else. It was my fault. And that was good of him to do that, because it was really, because the buck stopped there. But I don't think Dusty had been booking since 84, so by 87, 3 years of doing some of the biggest business that had ever been done in wrestling. And we know for a fact that because I have it in a lawsuit deposition, that Crockett Promotions grossed $21 million in 1986 on wrestling. Not on fucking pay-per-view and not on fucking TV commercials, but on wrestling. And that would be equivalent to around, almost 50 million today. And that was in 86. He was one of almost 15 full-time territories in the United States still operating. And Dusty was responsible for that. And Dusty was a great booker in terms of the big shows and the big picture. And he got guys hot. He got guys over. And he got heat on heels and he got baby faces over. And JJ was there for details, but sometimes you couldn't tell Dusty the details. Like the one time in Greensboro, when I went up to him, I said, Dusty, the finish you just gave us with the Fantastics, we did that 2 shows ago here with the Road Warriors. He said, that's okay, kid, they won't notice it's different people. All right, what am I going to say? It's fucking Dusty. And I think he lost his way there for a little while with, like I said, late 87, with people leaving, and things changing, and plus all the TV tapings. But overall, he got it back in 88 and was doing as big a business for a while there until they sold as he was in 85 and 86 and a lot of 87. But even if the booking was shite all the way around, it wouldn't have lost him as much money as they spent money that they didn't have yet because they thought it was coming. They bought the second plane, and they bought all those territories, Kansas City and Florida, to get the TV syndication, to get all their TV slots. And Crockett had people telling him, well, look how much money Vince makes with this TV syndication. Well, we'll do the same thing. But Vince had a huge front office of people and experienced people, and he was in a big major media center, New York, and he did it first. And instead of chasing Vince and trying to replicate Vince's business model, they should have concentrated on, as Flair said many times, the Southeast, the South, and the Midwest, and don't go past the Mississippi, and it'd been a lot better than it was. But There's no way that Dusty Rhodes just being off booking could have cost him $2 or $3 million. It was the planes and the TV times and the TV slots and the TV tapings and the overall expansion across the country that they felt like that they had to do. And when taking Starrcade out of Greensboro and putting it in Chicago, because the same idiots that said we were going to make all that money on TV syndication said, well, who wants to, nobody knows where Greensboro is. We need to be in Chicago and New York. Well, okay, so they went to Chicago and did a gross of a third of what they could have done in Greensboro. I didn't think it mattered how big the city was. I thought it mattered how big the house was, but apparently I was wrong. So all those things came in the same year, or in the same 1 year period, from 87 to 88. It just all came home to roost at the same time. So to say that Dusty's booking, unless he held Jimmy down and said, God damn you, you are going to buy a second plane, he might have, actually. But even the second plane wouldn't have goddamn been that bad as related to some of the other things. Of course, they did sometimes. They got so, in 86, I remember when they got that first plane, J.J. Dillon called me one time, we were going to Greenville, which is 105 miles from my apartment at the time. Greenville, South Carolina. And J.J. called me about 3 in the afternoon. He said, be at Butler Aviation at the airport at 5 o'clock. We're taking the plane to Greenville. I'm like, what? I said, because it costs like $2,500 an hour to operate that fucking Gulfstream. I said, I'm going to drive, JJ. I'm not going to fly 100 miles. I give my spot to somebody else. And I left my apartment at the same time that they all had to get to the airport, and I beat them to the building. But it was going so good. Everybody was living like a rock star. You've heard Flair say that Crockett's office parking lot over on Briarbend Drive looked like a Mercedes dealership. I was the only one that didn't have either a Mercedes, a BMW, or a Lincoln Continental. I broke down and got one of those T-Birds when they came out with the turbo. Remember, an 85 T-Bird turbo. And boy, it looked nice. It was bright red. But it only cost me $17,000, for fuck's sake. So when the magazine photographers would come down and shoot something, I'd just open somebody else's door and act like I was getting in their Mercedes. But, I will not hear anybody say it was Dusty's fault. It wasn't Dusty's fault. Because the guy running the company should have said, hey, you know what? We might be spending too much money that we ain't got coming in yet just because a lot of these people are supposedly smart say it's going to. And Dusty he'd run a big show, but he got big returns. And, like I said, that period, he kind of got in the weeds a little bit, but he was still able to pull out the big shows, and finally he got it all together and got the wagon circled and got business back up. But then, July, August, and September of 1988, we're doing six-figure houses in all those places I just mentioned. We record gates in some towns they've been running for years. October 31st or November 1st, whichever day it was officially that TBS took over. And then they fired Dusty the first week or second week of December. Look what they were doing in January. If you want to talk about sabotage, you want to talk about bad booking, and you want to talk about people that didn't want to see shit, you compare January 19, which we might do sometime, January 1989 with January 88, it looked like we were in the middle of fucking WrestleMania season that shitty month that I just told you about. Nothing happened in January 89 except the bottom fell out of the business and they never got it back because they continued to go further and further away from the Carolinas towns, more TV tapings, and Dusty wasn't booking. And as you'll recall, Jimmy Crockett was the interim booker for about 6 weeks until they got George Scott in, and he pretty much finished the thing the rest of the way off.
You talked about the predatory business practices of the WWF trying to prevent Crockett from getting on pay-per-view. What were your thoughts a couple months later from this when you guys ran the first Clash against WrestleMania and it was considered a success by so many people? But what were you guys thinking when you heard the news that you guys were going to, in a way, strike back?
Oh, we loved it. Why do you think that the first Clash of Champions, WrestleMania Day 88, why do you think that the two of the matches on the card placed in the Wrestling Observer and the Pro Wrestling Torch and Steve Beverly's Mac Watch and everything else as matches of the year, because goddamn everybody's like, you motherfuckers, we'll fix you up. You fucked us on pay-per-view and kept us from these $10 and $15, $20,000 payoffs. We're gonna fuck with you. And Ric Flair not only had the match of the year and made Sting a star, but remember us, the Fantastics? Who said, motherfuckers, we're gonna show you what this shit's like. And that goddamn match stands up today. We could have dropped a fucking cow in the ring and slaughtered it and not got any people any more excited than that match. And everybody was up that day because they wanted to prove a point. And we did ding WrestleMania that year. We took a lot away from it. And we were happy to do it because turnabout is fair play, as they say.
And that's when your feud with Donald Trump began.
Yeah, that's right. And that's another thing. We were in Greensboro in front of wrestling fans, and they were going fucking hoot and hollering crazy. And they were at Trump Plaza in front of, wasn't that like one of the deadest crowds in the history of wrestling big shows that year?
Yes, it was all the high rollers, however many of those
yeah.
were. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was never any doubt that the NWA in-ring product was so much superior to the WWF product during all the 80s. And I'm not knocking the individual talent that worked there. I mean, Slaughter and Patterson in the alley fight match and et cetera, they had good matches on occasion, but anybody with the power of eyesight could tell that the NWA in-ring product was so far ahead of the WWF that it wasn't even an issue. But we didn't have the infrastructure in the office. We still had, what was the goddamn CPA's name, and the three old ladies that were the secretaries in the front office, and Gene Anderson running promos, and Sandy Scott and the Murniks and a few other people were the local promoters. I don't know that 30 people full-time worked for Crockett Promotions in the office or promotional area when they grossed $20 million that year. So that was the difference, was the infrastructure. The product was far superior, and our coverage was the same. Vince beat us out west and in the Northeast. We kicked his ass in the South and in the Southeast. Midwest, it was a tie depending on the market, and the NWA style was more popular down in Texas. So and the ratings for TBS were just as good as USA's ratings, if not better. And the syndicated ratings were pretty goddamn close. Once again, varied from the market, but overall. So it wasn't a matter of a bunch more people seeing one product over another. It was just the fact that Vince had always had his shit together with his office operation compared to everybody else in wrestling. That was it. That's why McDonald's sells more hamburgers than the fucking guy that makes them from scratch down the block. It doesn't mean they're better hamburgers. It's always been that way. We got beat in the office. We did the job.
Thanks for being here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel for Chaos Corner. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. Don't you dare miss it.
I don't know that anybody
1987, 88, Jim Crockett Promotions. The deep dive here in the vault at Chaos Chronicles.
Next to him, working with him in the office in '96. The war, Crockett was out of the picture in '88. TBS paid him as a consultant to not listen to for a while after that. I don't remember Vince ever mentioning Jimmy Crockett's name because he was all, at that time it was all Turner and Bischoff and what was going on at that time. And I mean, let's face it, I didn't bring up on a regular basis, hey Vince, remember when we could have kicked your ass except you blocked us off pay-per-view, you fucking prick? I didn't start that fucking conversation. And he didn't feel the need to bring it up at that point, so I can't remember Vince ever mentioning Jimmy Crockett's name. I'm sure that Vince probably disliked him at the time because Jimmy he had a dry personality, very dry, and I'm sure he was rude to Vince because he probably didn't respect Vince any more than Vince respected him. So I'm sure in whatever dealings they had, especially over the TBS deal, you'll choke on that $1 million.
Right, that's the thing. When he buys the TBS spot for $1 million, Vince doesn't say, all right, thank you, good luck. He says, you're going to choke on that $1 million.
Yeah.
Who says that to, person you're making a business deal with? And then I just always look at it.
Well, but Vince, I'm sure, was mad because he was in effect getting kicked off TBS.
Right, because if he hadn't sold the spot, Turner was going to kick him off and make a deal with Bill Watts.
Yeah, and if that had happened, Lord, then I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about quitting the wrestling business if that had happened.
He knew how to compete with Vince. He knew how to punch Vince back.
Yeah, and plus just the 3 months that Mid-South Wrestling aired on TBS was the highest rated wrestling program ever on TBS. It beat Georgia Championship Wrestling, it beat Crockett's program, it especially beat Vince's. It was
the highest rated show on cable.
Yeah, because the wrestling fans knew to watch TBS for wrestling, and by cracky, when they saw that wrestling, they're like, holy shit, this is a whole new world. But, and I'm not trying to knock Vince now when I say this, but he doesn't take failure that well. And when I'm sure he thought, because he actually thought, and I know he thought this, and I would hear him say things that would make me indicate there, even though I wasn't there for this, that he thought that when they took Georgia Championship Wrestling off the air and put his product on, just like he thought this in St. Louis, that, well, when they see WWF wrestling instead of this stuff, they're going to go crazy over it. Well, they did go crazy over it. So many people wrote in saying, where is our fucking Gordon Soley Wrestling? Get this fucking New York hogwash off our air. That basically Turner was going to boot him off and make the deal with Bill Watts before he sold it to Crockett, and they got an NWA product back on because it was not any good. Unless you grew up on WWF wrestling in the Northeast, in those days, nobody wanted to watch WWF wrestling over the NWA or Georgia or Mid-South or whatever because, as I mentioned a while ago, the in-ring product was not as good. And it was more showbiz.
Don't you dare miss it.
Rebel against that.